Sarah Martinez walked toward the naval base gate with steady steps. Her dark hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and she wore civilian clothes, jeans, and a plain black t-shirt. Nothing about her appearance suggested she was one of the most dangerous women in the United States military. At 5 feet 6 inches tall with an average build, she looked like any other woman in her early 30s heading to work. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete as she approached the security checkpoint. Base personnel moved around her with purpose, some in uniform, others in civilian dress. Sarah had been away for 6 months on a classified mission that had taken her deep into hostile territory. The mission details were locked away in classified files, but the results spoke for themselves. 3 high-value targets eliminated, 2 American prisoners of war rescued, and 0 casualties among her team. Now she was returning to Camp Pendleton for a brief rest before her next assignment. The base felt familiar under her feet, even after months away. She had trained here, bled here, and proven herself here countless times over her 12-year career as a Navy SEAL. At the main gate, a young Marine private stood at attention. Tommy Williams was barely 20 years old, fresh out of boot camp, with only 3 weeks at his current posting. His uniform was perfectly pressed. His boots shined to mirror brightness, and his eagerness to prove himself radiated from every pore. He had heard stories about the elite warriors who passed through these gates, and he desperately wanted to show that he belonged among them. Tommy noticed Sarah approaching and immediately straightened his posture even more. Something about her calm confidence caught his attention. But in his inexperience, he misread the signals entirely. To his young eyes, she looked like a civilian who might be lost or perhaps trying to gain unauthorized access to the base. "Ma'am, this is a restricted military installation," Tommy called out, stepping forward with his chest puffed out. "I'm going to need to see some identification and know your business here." Sarah reached slowly into her back pocket and pulled out her military ID card. She had been through this routine thousands of times at bases around the world. The process was usually quick and professional. She extended the card toward Tommy without saying a word. Tommy took the ID and glanced at it quickly. In his nervousness and eagerness to appear authoritative, he barely processed what he was reading. The card clearly showed her rank as a lieutenant commander and indicated her special operations status. But Tommy was too focused on trying to look impressive to pay proper attention. "This doesn't look right," Tommy said, holding up the ID card. "How do I know this isn't fake? You don't look like military personnel to me." Sarah raised an eyebrow, but remained calm. She had dealt with overzealous young guards before, though usually they were more professional than this. "Private, I suggest you look at that card more carefully." Tommy felt a surge of irritation at what he perceived as condescension. In his mind, he was doing his job, protecting the base from potential security threats. The fact that this civilian woman was trying to tell him how to do his job only reinforced his belief that something wasn't right about the situation. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside while I verify this identification," Tommy said, his voice growing louder and more aggressive. "And I don't appreciate the attitude." Other personnel at the gate began to notice the commotion. Sergeant Major Rodriguez, a 30-year veteran who was Tommy's supervisor, looked up from his paperwork in the guard booth. He had seen Tommy's tendency toward overenthusiasm before, and made a mental note to intervene if things got out of hand. Sarah glanced around at the growing audience and sighed internally. She had hoped to enter the base quietly and get to her debriefing without any drama. The last thing she wanted was to make a scene that would draw unwanted attention. "Private, I'm going to give you one more chance to look at that identification properly," Sarah said, her voice remaining steady but carrying an undertone that suggested patience was wearing thin. Tommy interpreted her calm demeanor as smugness and felt his anger rising. In his limited experience, he had never encountered anyone who didn't show proper respect for his authority as a gate guard. The fact that this woman seemed completely unimpressed by his position infuriated him. "Ma'am, I'm placing you under detention for attempting to gain unauthorized access to a military installation with fraudulent identification," Tommy announced loudly, causing heads to turn throughout the area. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. She had been in life-or-death situations in some of the most dangerous places on Earth, But somehow dealing with an overeager recruit was testing her patience more than combat ever had. "Private Williams," she said, reading his name tag, "you are making a serious mistake. I strongly advise you to call your supervisor over here immediately." Tommy's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. Not only was this woman continuing to disrespect him, but now she was giving him orders as if she had some kind of authority over him. In his mind, this confirmed that she was probably some kind of troublemaker or security risk. "That's it," Tommy shouted, taking a step towards Sarah, with his hand moving toward his sidearm. "You're under arrest. Put your hands behind your back right now." The moment Tommy's hand touched his weapon, Sarah's entire demeanor changed. The calm, patient woman disappeared, replaced by a predator who had survived dozens of combat missions against trained enemy soldiers. Her stance shifted subtly, her weight balanced on the balls of her feet, her hands positioned for instant response to any threat. "Private, you need to step back right now," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet tone that cut through the morning air like a blade. But Tommy was beyond listening to reason. His pride was wounded. He felt disrespected, and now he saw what he believed was defiance of his lawful orders. Without thinking through the consequences, he lunged forward, intending to physically restrain what he assumed was an uncooperative civilian. The next few seconds unfolded in a way that would be talked about at Camp Pendleton for years to come. Tommy reached for Sarah's arm, expecting to easily overpower someone he saw as just another civilian woman. Instead, he found his wrist caught in a grip that felt like a steel trap. Before he could process what was happening, his feet left the ground and he found himself flying through the air. Sarah had reacted with the instincts honed through years of the most intensive military training available. The moment Tommy made physical contact, her body responded with a textbook defensive maneuver that sent the young Marine sprawling across the pavement. Tommy hit the ground hard, his helmet flying off and skittering across the concrete. He lay there for a moment, stunned and trying to figure out what had just happened. 1 second he had been reaching for a civilian's arm, and the next he was looking up at the sky with his back against the cold pavement. The entire gate area fell silent. Personnel who had been going about their morning routines stopped and stared at the scene unfolding before them. A woman in civilian clothes had just thrown a fully grown Marine through the air, as if he weighed nothing. Sergeant Major Rodriguez came running from the guard booth, his face a mixture of concern and anger. He had seen Tommy's aggressive behavior escalating and should have intervened sooner. Now he had a situation that was rapidly spinning out of control. "What the hell is going on here?" Rodriguez shouted as he approached the scene. Sarah stood calmly over Tommy's prone form, her posture relaxed but ready for further action if necessary. She looked up at Rodriguez with the expression of someone who had dealt with similar situations many times before. "Sergeant Major, your private attempted to physically detain me without proper cause and then made physical contact without authorization," Sarah explained in a professional tone. "I responded with appropriate defensive measures." Tommy struggled to his feet, his uniform now dirty and his pride thoroughly damaged. The physical pain was nothing compared to the humiliation of being thrown to the ground by someone he had assumed would be easy to handle. "She attacked me," Tommy protested, pointing an accusatory finger at Sarah. "She's some kind of martial arts expert or something. This proves she's dangerous and doesn't belong on this base." Rodriguez looked from Tommy to Sarah and then down at the military ID card that was lying on the ground where it had fallen during the altercation. He picked it up and examined it carefully, his expression changing dramatically as he read the information. "Oh, sweet Jesus," Rodriguez muttered under his breath as the full implications of what had just occurred began to dawn on him. The ID card clearly identified Sarah Martinez as a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy with Special Operations designation. Her security clearance level was far above anything Rodriguez had ever seen, and the list of commendations and awards attached to her record would have impressed any military professional. "Private Williams," Rodriguez said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of impending doom. "Do you have any idea who you just tried to arrest?" Tommy looked confused and still angry. "Some civilian with a fake ID who thinks she can assault military personnel and get away with it." Rodriguez closed his eyes and rubbed his temples, already imagining the paperwork and explanations that would be required. When he opened his eyes again, he looked at Sarah with a mixture of respect and apology. "Lieutenant Commander Martinez, on behalf of the United States Marine Corps, I apologize for this incident. Private Williams is new, and clearly hasn't been properly briefed on identification procedures for special operations personnel." Sarah nodded but said nothing, waiting to see how the situation would be resolved. She had no interest in destroying a young Marine's career, but she also couldn't allow the incident to go completely unaddressed. Tommy's face went pale as the implications of Rodriguez's words began to sink in. Special operations? But she's just a woman in civilian clothes. How was I supposed to know? By reading her identification carefully, instead of making assumptions, Rodriguez replied sharply. Lieutenant Commander Martinez is a Navy SEAL with more combat experience than most Marines will see in their entire careers. You just attempted to physically restrain one of the most highly trained warriors in the United States military. The color drained completely from Tommy's face as he began to understand the magnitude of his mistake. Navy SEALs were legendary figures in military circles, spoken of with reverence and respect by even the most experienced Marines. The idea that he had not only disrespected, but actually attacked one of these elite warriors made him feel sick to his stomach. Sarah watched Tommy's reaction with interest. She could see the exact moment when the reality of the situation hit him, and despite her annoyance at his behavior, she felt a small amount of sympathy for the young Marine. Everyone made mistakes, especially when they were young and eager to prove themselves. "Private Williams," Sarah said, her voice now calm and professional, "you made several serious errors in judgment today. However, I don't believe your intentions were malicious. You thought you were doing your job protecting the base, even though you went about it completely wrong." Tommy looked at her with a mixture of shame and gratitude. He had expected to be destroyed by this encounter, possibly facing court-martial for assaulting an officer. The fact that she seemed willing to show some understanding was more than he felt he deserved. "Ma'am, I don't know what to say. I thought you were just a civilian trying to sneak onto the base. I never imagined." Tommy's voice trailed off as he struggled to find words adequate to the situation. "What you never imagined was that someone who didn't look like your idea of a warrior could actually be more dangerous than anyone you've ever met," Sarah replied. "That's a lesson you need to learn quickly if you want to survive in the military." Rodriguez stepped forward, still holding Sarah's ID card. "Lieutenant Commander, what would you like us to do about this situation? Private Williams clearly violated protocol and assaulted an officer, even if he claims he didn't know your status." Sarah considered the question carefully. She could easily have Tommy court-martialed, and his military career would be over before it had really begun. On the other hand, he was young and had made an error in judgment, rather than acting with malicious intent. Sometimes the best lessons came from mercy rather than punishment. "I want Private Williams to spend the next week studying identification procedures and learning about the various types of personnel who pass through this gate," Sarah said after a moment. "I also want him to write a detailed report about what he learned from this incident and how he plans to avoid similar mistakes in the future." Tommy's relief was visible on his face. He had expected to be destroyed by this encounter, but instead he was being given a chance to learn from his mistake and move forward. "Thank you, ma'am," Tommy said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I promise this will never happen again." Sarah nodded and took her ID card back from Rodriguez. "See that it doesn't, Private. And remember, you can't judge someone's capabilities by their appearance. Some of the most dangerous people in the world look completely ordinary." As Sarah walked through the gate and onto the base, Tommy watched her go with new eyes. She moved with a confidence and purpose that he now recognized as the bearing of someone who had seen and done things he could barely imagine. The woman he had dismissed as a civilian troublemaker was actually one of the most elite warriors in the American military. Rodriguez shook his head and turned to Tommy with an expression of exasperation mixed with pity. "Son, you just learned one of the most important lessons you'll ever learn in the military. Never, ever make assumptions about people based on how they look. That woman has probably killed more enemy soldiers than you've seen in movies." Tommy nodded silently, still processing everything that had happened. His perfect morning had turned into a nightmare of embarrassment and professional failure. But somehow, he felt like he had been given a gift, Not many people got the chance to learn such an important lesson with such minimal consequences. As the normal routine of the gate resumed around them, Tommy began to understand that his real military education was just beginning. The uniform and the training were just the starting point. The real lessons came from experience, and today he had received more real-world education than months of classroom instruction could have provided. Sarah, meanwhile, continued her walk toward the base headquarters, already putting the incident behind her. She had dealt with thousands of young soldiers over her career, and most of them eventually learned the lessons they needed to survive and thrive in the military. Tommy would probably be fine once he gained some experience and learned to think before acting. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky as life at Camp Pendleton returned to its normal rhythm. But for Tommy Williams, nothing would ever be quite the same. He had learned that the world was full of people who were far more than they appeared to be, and that making assumptions about others could have consequences he never imagined. The story of the foolish recruit who attacked a Navy SEAL would become legend at the base, told and retold with growing embellishment as time passed. But for Tommy, it would always be remembered as the day he learned one of the most important lessons of his military career. Respect comes not from assumptions, but from understanding that true strength often comes in unexpected packages. Word of the incident at the gate spread through Camp Pendleton faster than wildfire. By the time Sarah reached the headquarters building, Marines and Navy personnel were already whispering about the woman who had thrown Private Williams across the pavement like he was a child's toy. The story grew with each telling, but the basic facts remained shocking enough without embellishment. Sarah made her way to the Special Operations briefing room, where Commander Jackson was waiting with her mission debrief documents. Jackson was a career Navy officer who had overseen special operations for 15 years, and he had heard about the gate incident before Sarah even arrived. "I heard you had an interesting morning," Jackson said with a slight smile as Sarah entered the room. "Poor kid probably didn't know what hit him." Sarah shrugged as she took a seat across from Jackson's desk. "He was young and eager. Reminded me of myself when I first started, except I knew better than to attack people I didn't understand." Jackson laughed and opened Sarah's mission file. "Well, according to the reports I'm getting, half the base now thinks you're some kind of superhero. The other half thinks Private Williams is the unluckiest Marine in history." The debriefing took 2 hours as Sarah provided detailed accounts of her recent mission activities. The operation had been successful beyond expectations, with several high-value targets eliminated and crucial intelligence gathered about enemy operations in the region. Jackson made notes throughout the session, occasionally asking for clarification on specific tactical decisions. Meanwhile, Tommy Williams was experiencing the longest day of his military career. Word of his encounter with a Navy SEAL had reached every corner of the base, and his fellow Marines were not letting him forget it. Some were sympathetic, understanding that anyone could make such a mistake. Others were merciless in their teasing, calling him the SEAL Slayer, and asking if he planned to take on Delta Force next. Sergeant Major Rodriguez had assigned Tommy to study duty, which meant spending his shift reading military manuals about personnel identification, security procedures, and the various types of special operations forces that might pass through Camp Pendleton. The reading was eye-opening for someone who had never really understood the complexity of modern military operations. Tommy learned that Navy SEALs underwent some of the most rigorous training in the world, with a dropout rate of over 80%. Those who made it through the program were capable of operating in any environment, from underwater demolition to high-altitude parachute insertions to urban combat scenarios. They were trained to be invisible when necessary and devastating when called upon. As he read about the selection process and training requirements, Tommy began to understand just how badly he had misjudged Sarah Martinez. The woman he had dismissed as a civilian troublemaker had survived training that would break most people physically and mentally. She had proven herself in combat situations that would terrify experienced soldiers. The more Tommy read, the more amazed he became that Sarah had shown him any mercy at all. According to the manuals, Navy SEALs were authorized to use lethal force when threatened, and Tommy's aggressive approach could easily have been interpreted as a genuine threat. The fact that she had simply thrown him down instead of seriously injuring him showed remarkable restraint. Around noon, Tommy was approached by Corporal Martinez, no relation to Sarah, who had been assigned as his supervisor for the week-long remedial training period. Martinez was a 5-year veteran who had deployed twice to Afghanistan and had a reputation for being tough but fair with junior Marines. "Williams, you ready for some real education?" Martinez asked as he sat down across from Tommy in the study room. "Because reading about special operations is just the beginning. You're going to learn what these people are really capable of." Martinez had arranged for Tommy to observe training sessions conducted by various special operations units stationed at Pendleton. The idea was to give the young Marine a better understanding of the caliber of personnel he might encounter in his role as a gate guard. Their first stop was the combat training facility, where a group of Force Recon Marines were practicing close-quarters combat techniques. Tommy watched in amazement as the Marines moved through scenarios that looked like choreographed violence, flowing from one technique to another with deadly precision. "These guys are good," Martinez explained, as they observed from a safe distance. "But they'll be the first to tell you that Navy SEALs are on another level entirely. Different mission, different training, different capabilities." Tommy watched the Force Recon Marines with new appreciation for the skill and training required for special operations. Each movement was purposeful, each technique polished through countless hours of practice. Yet, according to Martinez, these Marines, who looked impossibly skilled to Tommy's untrained eyes, considered Navy SEALs to be superior warriors. After the combat demonstration, Martinez led Tommy to the physical training area, where a group of Navy personnel were conducting conditioning exercises. The workout routine looked like torture to Tommy, with the sailors performing feats of endurance and strength that seemed almost superhuman. "SEAL training makes this look like a warm-up," Martinez commented, as they watched a sailor complete 100 pull-ups without stopping. "They do this kind of stuff underwater, in freezing cold water, after running 20 miles carrying full gear." Tommy shook his head in disbelief. The physical demands alone seemed impossible. But Martinez assured him that the mental and psychological requirements were even more challenging. Navy SEALs were selected not just for their physical abilities, but for their capacity to function under stress that would paralyze most people. As the afternoon progressed, Tommy began to develop a new understanding of the military hierarchy and the various levels of training and capability within different units. He learned that the woman he had confronted that morning represented the absolute pinnacle of American military training and experience. Back in the headquarters building, Sarah was wrapping up her mission, debriefing, and preparing for her next assignment. Commander Jackson had briefed her on a new operation that would require her unique skill set, but she would have a few days of downtime before deploying again. "There is one more thing," Jackson said as Sarah prepared to leave. "The incident this morning is going to require some follow-up. The base commander wants to use it as a training opportunity for all gate personnel." Sarah groaned internally. The last thing she wanted was to become the subject of base-wide training scenarios or briefings. She preferred to operate in the shadows, completing her missions without drawing attention to herself or her capabilities. "What kind of follow-up?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "A briefing session for all gate guards about identifying special operations personnel and understanding the various types of credentials they might encounter," Jackson explained. "The commander thinks it would be valuable for them to hear directly from someone with your experience." Sarah considered the request. She understood the value of proper training for gate personnel, especially given the security challenges facing military installations in the current environment. At the same time, she wasn't comfortable with the idea of becoming a teaching example for other people's mistakes. "Can't Rodriguez handle the briefing? He seems to know the procedures well enough," Sarah suggested. Jackson shook his head. "The commander specifically requested that you participate. He thinks it will have more impact coming from the person who was actually affected by the mistake." Sarah sighed and accepted the inevitable. Sometimes being a professional meant doing things that weren't particularly enjoyable but served the greater good. If her participation in a training briefing could prevent similar incidents in the future, it was worth the inconvenience. As evening approached, Tommy finished his study session and prepared to return to his barracks. His head was spinning with new information about military operations, special forces capabilities, and the complex world of modern warfare. The simple job of checking IDs at a gate now seemed far more complicated than it had that morning. Corporal Martinez walked with Tommy back toward the barracks, using the opportunity to reinforce some of the lessons from the day. "Williams, What's the most important thing you learned today? Tommy thought for a moment before answering. That I don't know nearly as much as I thought I did about the military or the people in it. Martinez nodded approvingly. That's a good start. But the real lesson is about respect. Every person who comes through that gate has earned their position through training, sacrifice, and dedication. Your job isn't to judge whether they look the part. Your job is to verify their credentials and treat them with the respect they've earned. As they walked, Tommy reflected on the events of the day. 12 hours earlier, he had been a confident young Marine who thought he understood his role and his capabilities. Now he felt like he was seeing the military world with new eyes, recognizing the depth and complexity he had never appreciated before. Corporal Martinez, Tommy said hesitantly. Do you think I'll ever get the chance to apologize to Lieutenant Commander Martinez properly? I mean, really apologize for how I acted? Martinez considered the question. Maybe. But the best apology you can give her is to learn from what happened and become the kind of Marine who would never make the same mistake again. Show her that her mercy wasn't wasted on you. Tommy nodded, understanding that his real journey was just beginning. The incident at the gate had been embarrassing and humiliating, but it had also opened his eyes to possibilities he had never considered. Maybe someday he would be skilled enough and dedicated enough to earn the kind of respect that Sarah Martinez commanded simply by walking through a gate. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the base training facility where she would conduct the briefing for gate personnel. About 30 Marines and Navy personnel were assembled in the classroom, including Tommy Williams, who sat in the front row with a notebook and pen ready. Sarah looked out at the group of young faces and saw herself from years earlier. Eager, confident, and largely ignorant of what the military world really contained. She decided to start with a simple question that would get them thinking. How many of you think you could identify a Navy SEAL just by looking at them? Sarah asked the group. About half the hands in the room went up, and Sarah smiled. Okay, let me tell you what a real Navy SEAL looks like. She clicked to the first slide of her presentation, which showed a photo of herself in full combat gear during a mission in Afghanistan. The image showed a warrior who looked every bit the part: tactical equipment, weapons, camouflage face paint, and an expression of focused intensity. This is me during a direct action mission 18 months ago, Sarah explained. This is what you probably expect a Navy SEAL to look like in the field. She clicked to the next slide, which showed a photo of her at a formal military ceremony, dressed in her dress uniform with ribbons and decorations clearly visible. This is me at an awards ceremony last year. This is what I look like when representing the Navy at official functions. The final slide showed a candid photo of Sarah in civilian clothes, similar to what she had been wearing the previous morning. She looked like any other woman in her 30s. Professional but unremarkable. The kind of person you might see at a coffee shop or grocery store, without giving her a second thought. And this is what I look like when I'm not on duty, Sarah continued. This is what I was wearing yesterday morning when Private Williams decided I was a security threat who needed to be arrested. A few chuckles rippled through the audience, and Tommy felt his face burning with embarrassment. But Sarah's tone wasn't mocking. It was educational. The point is that you can't identify special operations personnel by their appearance when they're not in uniform. We're trained to blend in, to look ordinary, to avoid drawing attention to ourselves. The day you can spot us by looking at us is the day we've failed at a fundamental part of our job. Sarah spent the next hour walking the group through proper identification procedures, the various types of credentials they might encounter, and the importance of treating everyone with professional respect, regardless of their appearance. She emphasized that their job was to verify identity and authorization, not to make judgments about whether someone looked like they belonged on a military base. During the question and answer session, Tommy raised his hand nervously. Ma'am, what should we do if we're genuinely unsure about someone's credentials? I mean, if something seems off but we can't put our finger on what? Sarah appreciated the question because it showed Tommy was thinking about his responsibilities rather than just trying to avoid future embarrassment. Ask for additional identification, call your supervisor, or request that the person wait while you verify their credentials through official channels. What you don't do is make assumptions or take aggressive action based on your gut feelings. Another Marine asked about the physical capabilities of special operations personnel and whether gate guards should be concerned about potential threats from people with advanced combat training. Here's the thing, Sarah replied. Anyone with genuine special operations training has also received extensive instruction in rules of engagement, appropriate use of force, and professional conduct. We're not going to hurt someone unless they represent a real threat to ourselves or others. Private Williams learned yesterday that I could have seriously injured him if I had wanted to, but I didn't because that wasn't necessary or appropriate. As the briefing concluded, Sarah looked directly at Tommy. Private Williams, you made a mistake yesterday, but you also showed that you're capable of learning from it. The fact that you're here taking notes and asking thoughtful questions tells me that you have the potential to become an excellent gate guard and a credit to the Marine Corps. Tommy felt a mixture of gratitude and determination. Sarah Martinez could have destroyed his career with a single complaint, but instead, she had given him an opportunity to learn and grow. He was determined not to waste that gift. After the briefing ended, several personnel approached Sarah with additional questions or comments. Tommy waited until the crowd had dispersed before approaching her himself. "Ma'am, I want you to know that I understand how badly I screwed up yesterday," Tommy said quietly. "I've been thinking about it all night, and I realized that I could have been shot or court-martialed for what I did. Thank you for showing me mercy I didn't deserve." Sarah studied the young Marine's face and saw genuine remorse and understanding. Private Williams, everyone makes mistakes. The measure of a person is what they do after they make the mistake. Use this experience to become better at your job and better as a Marine. Tommy nodded and stood at attention. "Ma'am, I promise you won't regret giving me this chance. I'm going to become the kind of Marine you can be proud to serve with." As Sarah left the training facility, she felt cautiously optimistic about Tommy Williams' future. The young Marine had shown the kind of character and willingness to learn that could take him far in the military, assuming he continued to grow from his experiences. The incident at the gate was already becoming part of Camp Pendleton folklore. But for Tommy it represented something much more important: the beginning of his real education as a professional soldier. He had learned that the military was full of extraordinary people who often looked completely ordinary, and that respect was something that had to be earned through knowledge and professionalism, not demanded through aggression and assumptions. As the week progressed, Tommy threw himself into his remedial training with an enthusiasm that impressed his supervisors. He studied every manual, attended every training session, and asked questions that showed he was thinking seriously about his responsibilities. By the end of the week, he had transformed from an overconfident rookie into a thoughtful professional who understood the complexity of his role. 6 months after the incident at the gate, Tommy Williams had become one of the most respected gate guards at Camp Pendleton. His transformation was remarkable to everyone who had witnessed his embarrassing encounter with Lieutenant Commander Martinez. The young Marine who had once made dangerous assumptions based on appearances now approached his duties with professional precision and genuine respect for every person who passed through his checkpoint. Tommy's reputation had evolved from cautionary tale to success story. New recruits were told about his mistake and subsequent redemption as an example of how failure could become the foundation for excellence. He had embraced his role as a teaching example, often sharing his story with younger Marines to help them avoid similar errors in judgment. The morning routine at the gate had become second nature to Tommy. He checked every ID carefully, treated each person with professional courtesy, and never made assumptions about anyone's capabilities or status based on their appearance. His supervisors had noticed the change and recommended him for accelerated promotion consideration. On a crisp Tuesday morning in November, Tommy was working his usual shift when he noticed a familiar figure approaching the gate. Sarah Martinez was returning from another classified mission, once again dressed in civilian clothes and carrying herself with the same calm confidence that had confused him months earlier. This time, however, Tommy's reaction was completely different. He immediately recognized her purposeful stride and alert bearing as the marks of a professional warrior. Even in jeans and a casual jacket, she carried herself in a way that spoke of training and experience to anyone who knew what to look for. "Good morning, Lieutenant Commander Martinez," Tommy said respectfully as she approached his station. "Welcome back to Camp Pendleton." Sarah paused, surprised that the gate guard had recognized her before she even reached for her identification. She looked more closely at the young Marine and realized it was the same Private Williams who had attacked her 6 months earlier. His transformation was immediately apparent in his posture, his demeanor, and his professional approach to the interaction. "Private Williams," Sarah said with a slight smile. "You're looking sharp this morning. I hear you've become quite the model gate guard." Tommy felt a surge of pride at her words, but kept his expression professional. "Thank you, ma'am. I've been working hard to become the kind of Marine the Corps deserves." Sarah handed over her military ID, and Tommy examined it with the thoroughness that had become his trademark. He noted the security clearance level, the special operations designation, and the various codes that indicated her elite status within the Navy. Everything was processed quickly but carefully, with no detail overlooked. "Thank you for your service, ma'am," Tommy said as he handed back her credentials. "Have a good day on base." As Sarah walked through the gate, she reflected on the remarkable change in the young Marine. The aggressive, assumption-making recruit had been replaced by a professional soldier who understood his role and executed it with precision. It was exactly the kind of transformation that made her proud to serve in the military. Later that morning, Sarah made her way to Commander Jackson's office for her mission debrief. Jackson had heard about her interaction with Tommy at the gate and was curious about her impressions of the young Marine's development. "So, how did our reformed gate guard handle things this morning?" Jackson asked, as Sarah settled into the chair across from his desk. "Like a completely different person," Sarah replied. "Professional, thorough, respectful. If I hadn't known it was the same Marine, I never would have believed it." Jackson nodded with satisfaction. The incident 6 months earlier had initially seemed like a black mark on the base's security procedures, but it had ultimately resulted in improved training protocols and at least one significantly better gate guard. Sometimes the most valuable lessons came from the most embarrassing mistakes. The debriefing covered Sarah's latest mission, which had taken her to 3 different countries over the course of 2 months. The operation had been complex and dangerous, requiring the full range of her special operations training. She had successfully completed all objectives while avoiding detection by hostile forces, a testament to her skill and experience. As they discussed the mission details, Jackson mentioned that Tommy Williams had submitted a request for special operations training. The young Marine had apparently been inspired by his encounter with Sarah to pursue more challenging assignments and higher levels of training. "What do you think of his chances?" Jackson asked. "You've seen him at his worst and heard about his improvement. Think he has what it takes?" Sarah considered the question carefully. Special operations training was extraordinarily demanding, with a failure rate that eliminated most candidates. Physical fitness was just the beginning. Mental toughness, adaptability, and the ability to function under extreme stress were equally important. 6 months ago, I would have said absolutely not, Sarah replied. But the fact that he was able to learn from his mistake and completely transform his approach shows real character. Whether he can handle SEAL training is another question entirely, but he's definitely worth considering. Meanwhile, Tommy was experiencing the best day he'd had since joining the Marines. Sarah's recognition of his improvement had validated months of hard work and dedication. More importantly, it had shown him that redemption was possible even after significant mistakes. During his lunch break, Tommy sought out Corporal Martinez, who had become his mentor and guide through the remedial training process. Martinez had played a crucial role in Tommy's transformation, providing both tough criticism and supportive encouragement when needed. "Corporal Martinez," Tommy said as he found his mentor in the base cafeteria. "Lieutenant Commander Martinez recognized me this morning and complimented my work." Martinez smiled broadly. "That's outstanding, Williams. You've come a long way from the Marines who tried to arrest a Navy SEAL. How do you feel about your progress?" Tommy thought for a moment before answering. "I feel like I'm finally starting to understand what it means to be a professional soldier, but I also feel like I've just scratched the surface of what I could become." This conversation led to a discussion about Tommy's future goals and his interest in special operations training. Martinez had been expecting this development. Many young Marines who encountered elite warriors became interested in pushing themselves to higher levels of performance. "Special ops training is no joke, Williams," Martinez warned. "The physical demands alone will break most people. And the mental challenges are even worse. You sure you're ready for that kind of commitment? Blows. Tommy nodded firmly. I know it will be the hardest thing I've ever done, but I also know that I don't want to spend my entire career wondering what I could have accomplished if I'd been brave enough to try. Martinez respected the young Marine's determination, but wanted to make sure he understood what he was considering. Tell you what. Let's get you enrolled in some advanced combat training first. If you can handle that without any problems, we'll talk about special operations schools. Over the next several weeks, Tommy threw himself into advanced training with the same intensity he had shown during his remedial education. He attended every optional combat skills course offered on base, studied advanced military tactics in his spare time, and began a punishing physical fitness routine designed to prepare him for more demanding challenges. His transformation became even more apparent to his fellow Marines. The young recruit, who had once been known for his embarrassing mistake, was now respected for his dedication and professional growth. Other Marines began asking him for advice about gate procedures and security protocols. One evening, as Tommy was finishing a particularly intense workout session, he was approached by a senior Marine who introduced himself as Gunnery Sergeant Davis. Davis was a veteran of multiple deployments and had a reputation as one of the toughest instructors on base. Private Williams, I've been watching your progress over the past few months, Davis said without preamble. I'm putting together a training cadre for Marines interested in special operations preparation. You interested in joining? Tommy could hardly believe what he was hearing. Being invited to join an elite training group was an honor he had never imagined possible 6 months earlier. Yes, Gunny, absolutely. Davis studied Tommy's face, looking for any sign of doubt or uncertainty. This isn't going to be fun, Williams. We're going to push you harder than you've ever been pushed before. Some Marines don't make it through the first week. You sure you're ready for that? Tommy met Davis's gaze steadily. Gunny, 6 months ago, I made the biggest mistake of my military career. Since then, I've learned that I'm capable of more than I ever thought possible. I'm ready for whatever challenges you want to give me. Davis nodded approvingly. Good answer. Training starts Monday at 0500. Don't be late. As word spread about Tommy's selection for the Special Operations Preparation Program, Sarah Martinez heard about it through the informal networks that connected different units on the base. She was pleased to learn that the young Marine was continuing to grow and challenge himself. The Special Operations Prep Program was designed to identify Marines who had the potential to succeed in elite training schools. It combined intensive physical conditioning with mental challenges, leadership exercises, and exposure to the kinds of stress that candidates would face in actual special operations selection. Tommy's first day in the program was a revelation. The physical demands were beyond anything he had experienced before, but the mental challenges were equally difficult. Instructors created scenarios designed to test decision-making under pressure, leadership capabilities, and the ability to adapt to rapidly changing situations. Despite the difficulty, Tommy found himself thriving in the challenging environment. The same qualities that had allowed him to learn from his mistake and transform his approach to gate duty served him well in the high-pressure training scenarios. He learned to think clearly under stress, make quick decisions with incomplete information, and maintain his composure when everything seemed to be going wrong. After 3 weeks in the program, Tommy was called to Gunnery Sergeant Davis's office for a progress evaluation. He had performed well in all aspects of the training, but Davis wanted to gauge his continued commitment to the demanding process. Williams, you've done solid work so far, Davis began. But this is just the beginning. If you're serious about special operations, the next step is to apply for actual selection courses. That means leaving Camp Pendleton, possibly for months at a time, and facing challenges that make this prep work look easy. Tommy had been expecting this conversation and had already made his decision. Gunny, I know it's going to be the hardest thing I've ever done, but I also know that I'll regret it for the rest of my life if I don't at least try. Davis smiled slightly. That's the attitude that gets people through selection. I'm going to recommend you for the next available slot in a special operations training pipeline. But remember, making it this far doesn't guarantee anything. The real test is just beginning. As Tommy left Davis's office, He reflected on the incredible journey that had brought him to this point. 6 months earlier, he had been an embarrassed failure who had attacked one of the most elite warriors in the American military. Now he was being recommended for special operations training himself. The transformation hadn't been easy. It had required him to completely reevaluate his assumptions about himself and others, to embrace humility in place of arrogance, and to work harder than he had ever worked before. But the process had revealed capabilities he never knew he possessed. That evening, Tommy wrote a letter to his family, explaining his decision to pursue special operations training. He described his encounter with Sarah Martinez and how it had changed his understanding of what it meant to be a professional soldier. He told them about the training he had completed and the challenges that lay ahead. As he wrote, Tommy realized that his mistake at the gate had been the best thing that ever happened to him. Without that humbling experience, he might have remained a mediocre Marine who never pushed himself to discover his true potential. Sarah Martinez's mercy had given him the opportunity to become someone he could be proud of. Several weeks later, Sarah Martinez was preparing for her next deployment when she received an unexpected visitor. Tommy Williams requested permission to speak with her privately, and she agreed to meet him in a small conference room near the headquarters building. Lieutenant Commander Martinez, Tommy began formally, "I wanted to thank you again for what you did for me 6 months ago. But more than that, I wanted you to know what's happened since then." Sarah listened as Tommy described his transformation, his success in advanced training, and his selection for special operations preparation. She was impressed by his dedication and growth, but not entirely surprised. The fact that he had been able to learn from his mistake had suggested he possessed the kind of character that could take him far in the military. "I'm proud of your progress, Private Williams," Sarah said when he finished. "But I want you to understand something important. Everything you've accomplished has come from your own hard work and dedication. I just gave you the opportunity to learn from your mistake." Tommy nodded, understanding her point. "Ma'am, I know that the real work has been mine to do. But without your mercy, I never would have had the chance to do it. I want you to know that I'll carry the lesson you taught me for the rest of my career." As their conversation concluded, Sarah reflected on the unpredictable nature of military service. She had encountered thousands of young soldiers over her career, and most of them had quickly faded from memory. But Tommy Williams had turned a moment of failure into the foundation for a remarkable transformation. 6 months after his embarrassing encounter at the gate, Tommy Williams stood at the edge of a new chapter in his military career. He had proven that failure could become the foundation for success, that humility could replace arrogance, and that the hardest lessons often led to the greatest growth. The foolish recruit who had attacked a Navy SEAL was gone, replaced by a professional Marine who understood that true strength came not from making assumptions about others, but from constantly challenging assumptions about oneself. As he prepared for the next phase of his journey, Tommy carried with him the knowledge that sometimes the most valuable gifts come disguised as the most painful failures. Sarah Martinez continued her career as one of the military's most elite warriors, but she would always remember the young Marine who had taught her that mercy could be just as powerful as any weapon. In showing compassion to Tommy Williams, she had helped create not just a better gate guard, but a better human being who would carry her lesson forward to others throughout his career. The story of their encounter became a permanent part of Camp Pendleton's culture, told to new recruits as an example of both the importance of proper procedures and the power of learning from mistakes. But for Tommy and Sarah, it remained a personal reminder that even in the rigid hierarchy of military service, individual moments of understanding and forgiveness could change lives in profound and lasting ways. Years later, when Tommy had completed his own special operations training and was serving as an instructor for new candidates, he would tell the story of his encounter with Sarah Martinez. He would explain to struggling students that failure was not the end of their dreams, but potentially the beginning of their real journey toward excellence. And he would always credit a woman who could have destroyed his career but chose instead to help him build a better one.